Hawk Roosting is from Ted Hughes' second book, Lupercal, published in 1960. It is one of the earliest poems in which Hughes used animals to imply the nature of man and to spark thought about just how much of man's behavior is instinctual as opposed to how much of man is ruled by his divine or godlike side. The hawk, who is the first person speaker of this poem, speaks entirely of instinctual actions, giving examples of actions that are natural to hawks but repugnant to creatures of conscience. The poem has no strict pattern to its rhythm or its rhyme scheme, thus, it is considered an open form poem. However, the poem does make use of structural devices and repetition in other ways to make its points. The most obvious structural pattern in hawk roosting is that there are four lines to each stanza or cluster of lines. The lengths of the lines within each stanza are different, so the number of words in each stanza varies. Nevertheless, there is a visual consistency as the eye skims down the page. This degree of order corresponds to the poem's subject matter by giving the piece an overall design, just as the speaker of the poem implies in stanza 3 that creation has an overall design. There are rhymes at the ends of third and fourth lines in the first stanza, and again in the first and third lines in the second. The fact that these are in the beginning of the poem and that the poem never rhymes again may indicate that the author intended his readers to think at first that this poem was more traditional in sentiment and structure than it really is, in order to make the hawk's coldness more shocking. Throughout the poem, there are internal rhymes or rhyming words placed near each other but not at the ends of lines. The wood in line 1 refers to a forest, as in the American expression the woods. Seated in a treetop, the hawk is able to look down on the world like a king. Hughes establishes the hawk's personality in the first line, though by describing it as having its eyes closed. The hawk is impressed with neither the vastness of the world nor with itself for being above the world. This hawk has no falsifying dreams about anything being better or worse than it really is. In line 3, the imagery or physical symbol of the bird being hooked at top and bottom not only reminds of the physical appearance of the bird, but also emphasizes the sharp parts of the bird that are used for attacking and killing. In addition, the use of feet instead of claws creates a link in the reader's mind between the hawk's life and human existence. This sort of connection is called personification. The hawk's claim in line 2 that it has no falsifying dreams is contradicted by its statement in line 4 that it rehearses perfect kills in his sleep. Critics have pointed out that although this hawk is supposed to be an impersonal killing machine, it has too much self-consciousness for us to consider it to be motivated by instinct alone. The hawk has an opinion about what would be perfection in killing, which shows that it is not outside of the sphere of morality, despite its claim to the contrary. In its tone, the second stanza displays a sense of self-importance that matches the hawk's physical position above the world. The words convenience, buoyancy, advantage, and inspection are all examples of elevated, sophisticated diction. Spoken by the hawk, these words indicate that it is a very intelligent bird. This use of language implies that the hawk is mentally as well as physically superior. In line 8, the hawk uses the word face to give human qualities to the earth, and it says not only that it can see the earth's face, but it is there for my inspection, as if the earth awaits the hawk's inspection. Creation, because it is capitalized, refers not just to all that exists but to God, since references to God are pronouns that stand for God are usually capitalized. The understanding of God here is less specific than the images usually accepted by major religions. In the third stanza, there are three mentions of the hawk's feet. The first is a somewhat simple one, linking the hawk to its natural habitat, which is portrayed as a difficult one through the use of the word rough. In the second mention, the hawk asserts that it is not just part of the world, but the end of the reason for all that exists. In line 12, the hawk takes this self important view even further, implying that since it exists as the summation of all that is, it is superior even to God. According to such reasoning, God and other beings are not recognized as having any more will or desire than the tree's bark has. The hawk sees others as creatures performing their specific functions, just as it performs its function when it kills. Presumably, in this worldview, the hawk's victims understand that it has no purpose but to kill them. Sophistry in the next stanza is reasoning that is clever and seems to be well founded, but in actuality is hollow and false. When the hawk says in line 15, "There is no sophistry in my body," it is indicating that the body does not reason badly because it does not reason at all. In this way, the poem seems to express the idea that any amount of reasoning will have some falseness to it, and that the only way to avoid falseness is to avoid reasoning. The author has responded to criticism that hawk roosting seems to approve of cruelty by saying that he only wanted the hawk to show what nature is thinking. If nature's thoughts are direct and without reason, then this poem could be seen as a record of responses to physical stimuli. However, the hawk has ideas about the ways of the world that seem to come from the exact sort of sophistry that the hawk denies. Similarly, line 16 uses language that is intentionally harsh. The hawk appears quite conscious of the fact that its actions are vicious and almost seems to enjoy it. Each stanza of this poem begins with a direct declarative statement that it is brought to a stop at the end of the first line with punctuation. Lines such as these are called end-stopped lines. An end-stopped line that brings the flow of the poem to halt just as the stanza is beginning gives the speaker's tone a cold sharpness, as if the speaker is stating conditions and making demands rather than having a conversation with the reader. In line 17, this technique is used to make the hawk's position on killing seem absolute and undisputable. As with the earlier reference to the whole of creation, this stanza makes absolute statements such as the one path, direct, through, and no arguments to convey the hawk's unhesitating certainty. In line 20, the hawk says that the rights it is entitled to are not the product of any arguments, implying that it has undeniable rights and that these rights are more important than anything, including God. This echoes the claim made in lines 18 and 19. Both lines emphasize the division between rationality and nature, implying that man, as a rational creature, is separate and distinct from the natural world and from God. In lines 1, 5, 9, and 21, this poem intermittently establishes a setting for the hawk who is speaking. The image in line 21 is especially notable because it does not emphasize the hawk's viewpoint but specifically tells us about something, the sun, that is out of the range of the hawk's vision. For the reader who is imagining a hawk on a tree branch, this detail helps to paint a picture, but given the hawk's self-centered attitude throughout the poem, that it would mention something it does not see is unusual. To some extent, the perspective in this stanza is not just the hawk's, but an objective point of view that is spoken through the hawk's eye. This is seen in the difference between lines 22 and 23. Line 22 is an impartial statement, and line 23 expresses the same basic idea, but through the hawk's all-encompassing ego. In making these two statements, one a positive observation and the other an aggressive claim, this poem draws attention to the different degrees of animal mentality that it offers. The final line is pure arrogance, extending the hawk's previous claims about being the center of all that came before and all that currently exists to include all that will come to be.